Hi everyone, it's Jan from Jan Plans Things, and welcome to my Plan With Me video for the last week of September. So that means this is my last spread with the Studio Ghibli theme, and over the past few weeks I've had a lot of requests for Princess Mononoke, but I've been putting it off because, as I mentioned last week, I'm not that confident with drawing people, but I thought I'd just have to bite the bullet because Kiki went okay last week, so I thought maybe I'll, give myself a bit of a challenge and try this. And I'm really glad I pushed myself to do this one because I think this might be my favorite layout yet in terms of my weeklies. So what I've done is I've drawn Mononoke with her trusty sidekick, and I've also done it in kind of like a slant across the top of the page, and the idea being that I'll fill the whole lot with color so that it's like quite rich when you flip to that page. I based the slant on this idea that I saw on Piccolo's website, Piccolo's Instagram. Sorry, he did a fantastic version of the Mononoke spread, so I'll link that down below in my YouTube description. And over the past month, I've been working really hard on improving my watercoloring as well as my line work. So basically, I've been working really hard on just improving my skills with inking this month, which is pretty good because Inktober is coming up next month and I really want to give that a good shot. So I'm using the Pentel Pocket Brush pen again. And at the beginning, if you see in a couple of my early videos, I struggled with this pen a bit because it's so sensitive at the tip. So I've slowly been adjusting the grip that I have on the pen so it's a little bit more vertical so that I can get more sharp lines. And I'm finding that this is working really well and it's really effective for drawing things like the fur on the back of her headpiece as well as the fur on the wolf. So I'm really pleased with how much I've improved with that. With the technique with this pen over the past month by just pushing myself to do a little bit more in terms of the spreads, because I think previously I did something quite simple, and because the Ghibli theme is a little bit more complex, it did require me to upskill a little bit. So when when I was drawing this though, because I am not as confident with human faces as I am with the rest of it, when I was penciling this in, Mononoke's face took me about the same amount of time as the rest of the entire spread. So that was a little bit interesting. I'm going through now with the 003 Sakura Micron. It's the finest one I have, and that's so I can do really fine really fine hatching over the horns, and that's just to add a little bit of depth to the image without using the watercolor. It's just something I find that works well. I'm adding my little tab for the which week we are in September on the bottom right this time. And this week I'm doing the layout a little bit differently because sometimes you see me and I've pre-placed all of the weekly dates on the page. But this around, I'm going a little bit. I'm following the bullet journal method a little bit more closely with the way they do their dailies. I do know that I can fit a week on a double spread, even if I have a lot of artwork on it. So you've only seen me label the Monday because I'll do a running list for Monday, and then once Monday finishes, I'll then move to Tuesday. So I won't have set areas where each of the dates are, and I'm going to see how that works for me this week. Um, I've also switched this week to whole bean paints. I'm just finished doing a review on how these work. But the reason I'm using the whole bean paints this week is because I found they're quite transparent and they're very good for doing skin tones. So because I had a person in there, that's why I switched to the whole beans to paint this spread. I wanted a really warm sepia look to this spread, so I'm tinting a couple of things with a little bit of lavender and purple as well. Purple that's leaning a little bit red, at least underneath the nose, because I'm finding the whole bean colors are so transparent. It's quite easy to stain something and tint something a certain color. It's kind of like when you're doing filters on Instagram, so that's what basically I was doing first. I'm using a couple of the warm browns and the sepia to slowly build up the colors in this. I think in the past I've pre-shadowed everything, like when I did the Castle in the Sky spread, but this time around, because I was being a little bit experimental with what I was doing. I wanted a little bit more control over the colors, and it was a new palette, so I'm basically building up the colors from scratch, and I'm just working from left to right basically so that I don't accidentally stick my hand in the paint and smudge it everywhere because I'm a bit impatient. I know that the wolf in the movie is actually white, but I really, because I wanted to render it a little bit warmer, I've just made him a little bit more brown in this picture, and to help him blend with her a little bit, because I found that if I had painted everything white, it would look a little bit too blank. And I basically based that part of the coloring on the reference picture that I had from of the wolf from Piccolo. So that was like a stylistic choice. I've also switched this week from using my Winsor Newton brushes to this Isobe Kolinsky brush. This is a number 4 size, and I basically paint the entire page with this brush. I'm trying to experiment with using a few more affordable brushes because I've been quite spoiled with my Winsor Newton brushes, and I wanted to try something a little bit more affordable to see whether or not I could find some good brushes to recommend you guys, especially if you were starting out. The Isobe, I think, it's an affordable brush, but it's still quite expensive in comparison to some of the ones that you can get from art stores, but I'm finding that one not bad, and I'm also testing the ones by White Knights, which are much cheaper than the Winsor Newton or the Isobes. So I've gone through now, and you're noticing that I'm literally toning the entire page as I'm going, because I'm actually brushing on the paints quite dry. I'm not doing any like wet on wet painting or anything. If the brush itself, because I'm putting the paint on when it's so dry, you can actually see the tip isn't coming back together because I'm barely dipping it in the water, and I'm drying off the brush on a napkin as I go as well, because I want to make sure it's as feathery as possible to imitate the fur. I'm also trying to keep my color palette as warm as possible, so any of the colors that I'm using, I'm trying to tint with the same Indian red and sepia so that it stays kind of like uniform in terms of lighting in the picture as well. So when I'm gonna go through and paint the leaves later on, I will pre-tint everything with a little bit of that brown color so that it doesn't contrast so much. This is especially because she wears a red mask with the red ears, and I didn't want that to clash too much in the picture. So what I'm doing now is I'm just rendering the back, and I know that the wolf kind of would stop around, I think, 3/4 of the way across the page. So I'm doing this kind of blend where it goes from the brown to this red in the end, so that the red contrasts with her mask as well, and kind of like draws the eyes to both parts of the image. That was just like a compositional choice that I made, because I did want that side to be warm and not just brown, and I thought just bringing back the red would really help with how the page looks and how it's grounded. And I think it really works well because it makes the image look like it's all kind of just like a snapshot, and I've kind of torn the page across that point. And I really like how this turns out, because I just feel like it just looks like a scene from the movie, and it's not just like an object that I've placed in the middle of the page. Sometimes I'm a bit bemused, like watching this back. I'm quite impressed with my past self and being able to do this, because if you had told me to do something like this maybe 6 months ago, I would have honestly not had a clue how. So it just shows how much practice helps, and I'm just feeling a lot more confident after trying a whole bunch more of like more complex spreads this month, and just in general practicing drawing a lot more. So I'm really happy that one of the main goals that I had when I started my bujo was to be able to practice drawing, and the fact that I forced myself to draw every week at least, with a weekly spread, and nowadays a few more because I'm doing reviews for you guys in between. It's made a big difference to my confidence and my ability to attempt a whole bunch of these different types of spreads. So I have to thank you guys for pushing me on and suggesting some things that I probably wouldn't have tried if you just left me to my own devices. So the final thing I'm doing now is I'm just going through and just tinting everything as much as I can, and just giving a little bit of depth. So I'm dipping the paint directly into the pan. So I'm tipping the brush directly into the pan to get the really rich colors. But once again, I'm brushing on really dry, especially when I'm doing that around the wolf and her headpiece, just to make that look as feathery as possible. And when I'm just shading the bits to the right, that's when I take a little bit more sorry, Humphrey just had a bit of a walk through the page. That's when I take a little bit more liberty with the water, so that I can kind of just dab it in and move the ink across. I find that this last final piece really gives some depth to the image. This stage is also where I have to be the most careful, because if I just leave myself to it, I might overwork the page. So I do have to give myself a bit of a deadline, so you can stop now. And what I'm doing now as a final touch is to use the white gouache and just use that to highlight some of the areas, because I didn't use masking fluid this time around, because I thought the highlighted areas were a bit lighter, and I kind of wanted that darker foresty look. So I'm just going through and just adding a little bit of highlights, just a little bit in the fur, and as well in the headrest. So I'm really pleased with this one. It's probably one of my favorite spreads that I've done so far. And thank you so much for watching and listening. See you again next time. Bye.